Okay, so I'm going to show for you how to solve the problems on the summative review. These are great problems to go over to do well on the Chapter 3 test. Now here, I have an equation with variables on both sides. So I want to get my variable on one side. So I'm going to add 3x to both sides. And I get 7x plus 5 equals negative 9. Notice I bring down the equal sign. Notice I'm careful to bring down the sign with the negative 9. Now I want to get my constants on the same side, so I'm going to subtract negative 5. I'm going to subtract 5 from both sides. So 7x equals negative 14. Now I'm going to be careful to divide the side that has the variable by the coefficient, and I get x equals negative 2. Notice in my work, you can see the equal sign coming down at each step. Okay, now, the next one we have to distribute. So number 2 is 5 times x minus 3 plus 2 equals, now I'm going to rewrite this and put grandma at the front door. Why confuse myself when I can just move it around? So now I'll distribute the x, being careful to distribute to both terms. Many of you, now that you're more comfortable with distributing, get a little careless, so be careful that you always distribute to both terms. On the test, you can draw reminders by drawing little arrows for yourself. Now, I'm going to combine my negative 15 with my positive 2. Be careful not to just think of it as minus 15 plus 2. Think of it as a negative 15, comma, 2. So when I add them together, I get negative 13. Now that both sides are simplified, I'm going to get my variable on one side. And now I'm going to add 12 to both sides. So x equals negative 1. Now you can repeat the video, slow the video down, speed the video up, whatever you find helpful. For number 3, 1/4 times 8x minus 12 equals 1/5 times 5 minus 10x. Now, everyone always gets confused with fractions. Now, with fractions, I could always multiply both sides of this equation by 20, because 20 is the common denominator, and you can always eliminate fractions from your equation by multiplying by the common denominator. But in this case, it would be easier for me just to distribute the fractions, because 8 and 12 are multiples of 4, 5 and 10 are multiples of 5. This way, by distributing my fractions, I will eliminate fractions. So 1/4 of 8x is 2x, 1/4 of negative 12 is negative 3, 1/5 of 5 is 1, 1/5 of negative 10x is negative 2x. Now, I'm going to add 2x to both sides. Notice I'm keeping my equal sign. I'm going to add 3 to both sides and divide by 4. So x equals 1. Now, for number 4, now for this, I can't get rid of the 2/3 by multiplying by the reciprocal, because that's not going to help me with 1/6. I can't multiply this side by 3/2 and this side by 6. So my only option is to multiply by the common denominator. Now think, if you were to add 2/3 and 1/6 together, what common denominator would you use? You would use 6. So if you're confused whether the common denominator is 3 or 6, it's always the bigger of the two numbers. So now I'm going to multiply both sides by 6. I remember, I don't multiply the grandchildren, I multiply Grandma. Grandma will take care of multiplying the grandchildren. 6 times 2 is 12, divided by 3 is 4, or I could just cross-simplify and say 2 times 2 is 4. Either way, Grandma turns into 4 on the left. Grandma disappears on the right because she turns into a 1. Now I have a much simpler problem with no fractions. So I distribute, and then I add x to both sides. And then I add 32 to both sides. And I get 29x equals 36. I don't automatically assume I'm wrong because I'm going to get a weird fraction as an answer. I understand that sometimes you can have answers that are fractions. And this answer is 36 over 29. Now for number 5, I have decimals. And the best way to get rid of decimals is to read the decimals properly. In this case, 5 and 1/10, 2 and 6/10, 4 and 2/10. And I realize I should multiply every term by 10. Now the most common mistake here is everyone multiplies this by 10, everyone multiplies this by 10, everyone multiplies this by 10, and many of you then do this. That is wrong. I did not multiply a by 10. Even though there's no decimal there, the rules of math say you must multiply it by 10. So now I'm going to add 26a to both sides. I'm going to subtract 42 from both sides. Now here, I'm not going to divide both sides by 9. Many of you are going to look at this quickly and think, well, I divide by the smaller number. That's not how things work. You divide to isolate the variable. The coefficient of the variable is 36. So to turn the variable into just a, isolated, I have to divide both sides by 36. And I end up with a equals 1/4. So be careful of this error. Do not just divide by the smallest number. Okay, now turn the page. And number 6 is a bunch of fractions. Now, to clear an equation of fractions, we multiply by the common denominator. In this case, the common denominator would be 6, because 6 is evenly divisible by 3 and 2. So that means I make Grandma 6, and I make sure Grandma distributes to all terms. 6 times 5 is 30. 30 divided by 3 is 10. 6 times 1 is 6. 6 over 2 is 3. 6 times 2 is 12. 12 over 3 is 4. 6 times 3 is 18. The most common mistake is not to multiply 6 times 3, because you're thinking, why? I don't need to get rid of a fraction, but you still have to do that. Now I'm going to subtract 3x from both sides. And subtract 18 from both sides. And x equals -8. Solving these equations, if you can solve all these equations, you will have no problem on the Chapter 3 test, or really, if you can solve these equations, you are set for high school math. Okay, now I'm going to distribute. See, I even put the arrows and I'm pretty good at math. Negative 12 plus 24n equals 4n minus 10. I'm going to subtract 4n from both sides. Careful to make sure I realize that's a negative 10. Now I'm going to add 12 to both sides. And again, I'm not going to divide by 2 because the coefficient of n is 20, and n is what I'm trying to isolate. So n equals 1/10. But many of you will be tempted to divide by 2 and say n equals 10, which would be wrong. So be careful of that. And number 8. Okay, again, I only have one fraction, but 1/4 x plus x would be 1 1/4 x. I could make it 5/4 x, but a lot of you get confused with that. So I think the best strategy is to multiply everything by 4 and get rid of the fractions. 4 times 1/4 is 1, so I have 1x. 4 times x is 4x equals 40. I get 5x equals 40. Divide by 5, divide by 5, x equals 8. Now, and there is another way of doing this one, which I will demonstrate. I could combine my 1/4 x and my x and make it 1 1/4 x equals 10. I could then change this to an improper fraction equals 10, and I could then multiply both sides by my reciprocal. This all goes away, and I get x equals 8. I get the same answer. So that's an alternate way, though I will say most of you are not comfortable doing it this way. Now, the last one, again, I only have one fraction, but many of you want to get rid of the fractions, so let's multiply by 5, the common denominator, remembering to multiply every term. Subtract 15, and you get y equals 10. Makes it much easier.